Behold, the Gilded Age showpiece. Everyone perished. Lockwood-Mathews, a masterpiece from the era of excess. An opulent estate constructed not merely from rock, but from drive, secrecy, and a cost too grim to utter. Observe the luster, marble corridors, grand ballrooms, artworks designed to defy death. Yet under the foundations lurks a darker tale. Indebtedness, dread, shattered partnerships. This residence draws misfortune like a magnet. As the grand stairs sparkle, the lineage crumbles, and those who thought they'd escape the world's gaze here simply fade from the city's ledger and collective recollection. Guided tours highlight the splendor. Ours reveals the invoice. Whose life settled the debt? Whose hush sealed it? Past the elegant front, sealed chambers echo with murmured identities, and paintings gaze with unsettling intensity. How could a dwelling crafted for its inhabitants' everlasting fame endure beyond them all? If design bestows eternal life, why did Lockwood-Mathews claim no victors in its own vision? In 1864, amid a country ripped by conflict, a single individual in Norwalk, Connecticut, resolved to erect a structure surpassing the chaos. Not just a home, but a bold statement. LeGrand Lockwood had amassed his riches through finance and railways in an age where wealth could emerge swiftly and dissolve just as fast. He weathered the 1857 financial crash. He steered through wartime ventures without foundering. At age 42 in 1864, his fortune required a tangible testament, an undeniable monument of success. He selected an elevated spot in Elm Park, prominent along the Boston Post Road, encompassing 50 acres that proclaimed prestige prior to any groundwork. This wasn't meant to conceal affluence. It aimed to render riches impossible to overlook, carved in stone, quantified by expansive wings and chambers. The architect he engaged grasped this vision perfectly. Detlef Lenau came to Norwalk bearing continental expertise and Yankee ambition. Originating from Germany and schooled in Paris, he had already crafted estates for Manhattan's upper crust. He understood Lockwood's desires, mirroring those of his patrons. Beyond basic luxury or trendy decor, he sought grandeur and endurance, structures that eclipsed fleeting fame, designs that stood as irrefutable testimony. The plans Lenau drafted that year were remarkable, surpassing even the lofty goals of the Gilded Age. Spanning about 44,000 square feet with 62 rooms, Second Empire styling featuring a mansard roof to dominate the horizon. French imperial motifs adapted to Connecticut terrain, proclaiming that U.S. fortunes could acquire and amplify old-world prestige. Construction kicked off in earnest by early 1864. The base alone took months to lay, blocks of Connecticut granite, hewn and positioned with exactitude for enduring duty. The walls employed sturdy, load-bearing masonry, eschewing the slimmer balloon framing common elsewhere. Robust builds with controlled windows on the lower level, where vulnerabilities called for defense. Or barriers intended to withstand ages, not just elements. The workforce records from that period resemble a roster of expertise. Italian stonemasons, French plaster artisans, German carpenters. Lockwood wasn't gathering a neighborhood team for a routine build. He was orchestrating a global atelier to fashion a home, rivaling the finest in Newport or Manhattan. The initial funding, generous prior to any upright structure, mirrored this purpose. Preliminary figures approached $1.5 million, equivalent to around $30 million today. Yet, budgets weren't limits. Lockwood wasn't constraining an endeavor to a figure. He was deploying figures to define the endeavor. The aim wasn't restraint by limits. The aim was creation that rendered limits obsolete. By the close of 1864, the framework emerged along the roadway. Basement walls thrust upward from the soil, granite layers aligned with geometric precision. The layout signaled a magnitude unprecedented in the locality. Laborers streamed in daily, necessitating special barracks. Freight trains brought supplies at regular intervals. Italian marble, South American timbers, precision fittings from New York workshops. This was factory-level home building. Lienau's schedule was bold. 4 years total, from start to finish, to erect 62 rooms, incorporate cutting-edge utilities, and polish every detail to gallery quality. A timeline banking on no crises, no trade blocks, no supply gaps, nothing to halt the ascent. It presumed the world pausing as the mansion rose. Mired in the damp earth of 1864, overseeing the initial layers placed, Legrand Lockwood had grounds for optimism. His financial firm stood firm. His rail investments yielded gains. The conflict would conclude. Prosperity would boom. And this estate would endure as indelible evidence of his triumphs. Yet, endurance faces a rival. What occurs when a structure intended to endure for ages falls under the ownership of someone whose days are numbered, when enduring stone outlasts its founder. During that initial year, as the granite foundations ascended, artisans gathered, blueprints were refined, and agreements progressed. Those dilemmas seemed distant, curious, maybe, yet far from pressing. The project was feasible, so construction proceeded, spanning 4 years in total. The edifice grew taller, but elevation represented merely one hurdle. What distinguished Legrand Lockwood's concept from mere structural aspiration lay in the concealed networks of conduits, ductwork lattices, and concealed mechanisms that rendered a 44,000-square-foot residence truly habitable. This was the year 1864. The majority of U.S. dwellings depended on wells, privies, and open hearths for basics. Lockwood envisioned something revolutionary, a marvel of engineering sheathed in marble. The mechanical features outlined in Detlef Lienau's plans were groundbreaking for the era. Far from untested innovations, Lockwood shunned being an experimental subject. They embodied the pinnacle of established advancements, the caliber of systems found in Paris or London's premier hotels, now integrated into a personal estate in Connecticut. Consider the water supply first. The property demanded its own hydraulic framework. A purpose-built water tower on the estate, drawing from deep wells, generated the force to distribute running water across all levels. Unlike the typical homes of the period that offered only chilly streams, this setup provided both heated and chilled options, to dedicated lavatories on every story. The extent was impressive. Records suggest around 30 to 40 spaces featured plumbing provisions. Although accounts from the time vary, several complete bath chambers equipped with fine china fittings sourced from England, staff areas with independent cleansing setups, a level of hygienic engineering that outpaced many U.S. urban centers for decades to come. The warmth distribution echoed such forward thinking. While other grand homes depended on hearths and sporadic coal burners, Lockwood implemented an extensive hot water radiator array. An enormous coal-burning furnace in the cellar produced warmth circulated via iron radiators in nearly all major spaces. Conduits snaked behind partitions and under flooring, invisible yet indispensable. The technical hurdles were substantial, achieving uniform temperatures over 62 chambers, offsetting heat escape from lofty vaults and expansive panes, and guaranteeing consistent performance amid New England's harsh colds. The furnace was a bespoke unit, proportioned to the structure's capacity instead of repurposed from off-the-shelf designs. Ventilation followed suit. Lienau devised an intricate maze of airflow pathways woven into the building, with external fresh air inlets, subtle outlets, and interior routes that encouraged movement, even in inner chambers, distant from outside walls. This wasn't powered draft, still years in the future, but ingeniously directed natural airflow, bolstered by strategic heater positioning. The results were evident. spaces free from stagnation, even on sealed-off winter days. Breezes guided along routes sketched out well before the first stones aligned. Illumination via gas introduced further intricacies. The grounds housed its own gas production facility, distilling coal into lighting gas. From there, an extensive piping grid supplied scores of luminaires, ornate pendants in reception areas, mounted brackets along hallways and passages, bedside lamps in sleeping quarters. Each required its own conduit, valve, and safeguards against hazards. Every outlet posed a risk, mitigated through deliberate planning rather than improvisation. The gas infrastructure necessitated expert involvement from the outset. Piping specialists followed precise blueprints, inspecting seals for breaches and adjusting flows for varying heights. Upon finishing, countless lengths of tubing coursed through the interiors. A vascular network pumping illumination instead of life force. Internal messaging depended on speaking tubes. Polished brass conduits connected key areas to service zones, allowing occupants to summon help or relay directives without stirring. Basic in principle, but executed on a grand scale that required planning amid the skeletal and final phases. Preserved documents reveal meticulous detail. Bills for brass fittings, marked with placement identifiers, schematics, mapping lines through exact barriers, thermal computations accounting for space sizes and light ingress, logs of pressure trials at various heights. No approximations here. This was precise craftsmanship. Beyond ornamentation or outfitting, these installations cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The expert workforce prolonged the timeline by months. Still, the reward was a dwelling operating like a boutique inn. Unified utilities offering luxuries unavailable to most citizens for half a century more. By 1867, the mechanisms hummed to life, and the building neared completion. The apparatus performed. Lines sustained force. Emitters delivered constant warmth. Gas flames bathed the interiors in glow. Under its elegant facade, the landmark possessed a vital core. At last, it awaited spirit. At last, it craved decoration. A mere operational residence fell short of the mark. For individuals like Legrand Lockwood, flawless mechanics served merely as the groundwork. Elevating a grand estate from noteworthy to noteworthy lay in the pieces adorning the walls, gracing the exhibition spaces, and lingering in guests' recollections, long after the heating pipes or illuminated fixtures faded from thought. Art transcended mere ornamentation. It stood as evidence. Lockwood intuitively understood this truth. He had observed how Manhattan's upper crust wielded refinement like wealth itself, recognizing that a single apt painting in an ideal setting could alter one's societal position more potently than any fortune in the bank. Thus, with the estate approaching finalization in 1867, he focused on populating it with items that would render the very structure almost incidental. That year brought the focal piece. Albert Bierstadt's Domes of the Yosemite was no modest image suited for lounging above a sitting-room couch. Rather, it was an immense painting, approximately 9.5 feet high and 15 feet across, capturing California's untamed landscapes in the grandiose, emotive style that positioned Bierstadt as the priciest U.S. artist of his era. The purchase drained about $25,000 from Lockwood's coffers, equivalent to over $500,000 now. Far from a whimsical acquisition, it represented a deliberate stake in prestige. Bierstadt's sweeping vistas of the frontier had evolved into must-have treasures for those asserting prominence in the opulent era of America's Gilded Age. Emblems of expansionist zeal on canvas, wilderness as sacred space, the frontier validating the nation's unique destiny. Possessing a prime Bierstadt proclaimed that one comprehended priorities, and possessed the means to flaunt them. Hanging it required structural adjustments. Detlef Lenau's eight-sided central chamber, with its sturdy enclosing barriers, had been crafted to support masterpieces of such proportions. Domes of the Yosemite occupied a spot impossible to overlook upon entering, commanding the area through its raw immensity as the initial standout artwork in any tour. The framing alone made a bold declaration, elaborately sculpted, lavishly gold-leafed, crafted to archival quality. This overpowering allure was precisely the impact Lockwood sought. Splendor so commanding it silenced all argument, yet Bierstadt marked just the start. The inner spaces required outfitting commensurate with the exterior's grandeur. Lockwood enlisted New York's premier purveyors of ornamental crafts. Herder Brothers and Léon Marcotte's ateliers catered to patrons of boundless funds and precise visions of opulence. Herder Brothers excelled in erudite furnishings that evoked Renaissance Italy or France's Second Empire, while staying quintessentially American in form and scale. Their creations went beyond utility. They embodied debates in wood and fabric about discernment, scholarship, and sophistication. Marcotte infused continental expertise. Born and schooled in France, he sourced authentic antiques and produced replicas so faithful they mimicked heirlooms from the continent. His additions lent the interiors an aura of legacy, suggesting the assortment had built up over eras rather than through a focused spree of purchases. Preserved bills reveal a systematic build-up. Full sets for whole chambers, harmonious groupings of seating, surfaces, storage, and reflectors, drawing rooms equipped to precise layouts. Sleeping quarters aligned with the building's trim and portals. This transcended adornment. It was symphonic arrangement, every component selected to amplify one unified impression. The study garnered special focus. Shelving, reaching from floor to ceiling in etched walnut. A commanding writing table, evoking diligent pursuits. Hide-upholstered seats arranged for evening perusal under gas lamps. The volumes, thousands strong, formed their own reservoir of influence. Whether Lockwood poured over everyone mattered little. Their array proclaimed the intellectual caliber the residents purported to house. Fabrics hailed from overseas factories. Silk damask for ceremonial areas. Velvet for cold-season hangings. Linen for warmer swaps. Rugs tailored to spatial specs. Wall coverings either handcrafted or sourced from Parisian makers. No zone, from baseboard to ceiling edge, escaped this meticulous care. The communal areas evolved into display zones unto themselves. Beyond the Bierstadt, modest works dotted the spaces, scenes of nature, likenesses, quiet arrangements, statuary grounding the foyer. Ornamental items filled every deliberate vantage. The line separating personal dwelling from civic exhibit blurred by design. Guests were intended to sense immersion in a cultural bastion, not just a private abode. By 1868, with building work drawing to a close, the transformation had culminated. The mechanism had ascended to icon. The icon had ascended to archive, and the archive conveyed a singular message to all who entered. Le Grand Lockwood had attained a pinnacle of refinement surpassing raw riches. Artifact-level precision in all aspects, engineered for ages, not years. Yet ages require more than discernment and funds. They require duration that no one truly commands. Duration, as it happened, was the sole commodity wealth couldn't amass in abundance. In 1868, the estate stood finished. Mechanisms functioned as intended. The Bierstadt presided over its pavilion. The Herder brothers' furniture groupings maintained their impeccable alignment. For just one fleeting year, the vision Le Grand Lockwood had conceived unfolded precisely as he had planned. Then, on September 24th, 1869, Black Friday, the crisis erupted in New York and spread rapidly via telegraph, hitting financial hubs nearly simultaneously. Gold prices plummeted, stock values vanished. Institutions that seemed secure in the morning were bankrupt by evening. The very systems that had forged Gilded Age riches exposed their inherent vulnerability. Legrand Lockwood observed cracks forming across his empire. His banking firm held risks in multiple sectors: railroads, industry, and high-stakes investments that thrived in growth, but proved disastrous in downturns. Exact figures stayed hidden. Gentlemen of his stature avoided publicizing setbacks. Yet the trajectory was clear. Holdings that appeared substantial on Monday's ledgers were valueless by Friday. Reports chronicled the chaos with grim tables of plummeting quotes, restricted cash access, business failures, and widespread turmoil as tycoons unused to defeat confronted it squarely. Lockwood's reputation escaped the most prominent failures. Too prominent, too networked for glaring media scrutiny. The fallout struck regardless. In mere weeks, the fallout intensified. Obligations once bearable amid rising valuations turned oppressive as worth evaporated. Lenders demanded repayment. Financing halted. The engine that had constructed the mansion and acquired the Bierstadt now required immediate funds in a cash-strapped environment. Elm Park transformed into a stark emblem of fortune's whims. Each marble pillar represented capital urgently needed elsewhere. Every gas fixture trapped funds in unclaimable metal. That $25,000 Bierstadt, once a bold declaration of sophistication, now symbolized $25,000 unavailable to settle looming obligations. Lockwood started disposing of assets discreetly, not hastily or dramatically. Figures in his circle shunned public auctions. Subtly, via intermediaries, targeted items returned to circulation. Custom room furnishings, lesser paintings beyond the core display, ornaments that could vanish without obvious gaps. Each sale marked a quiet concession, masked as prudent adjustment. Remaining documents revealed deliberate strategy amid stress, correspondence probing values, valuations for specific objects, deals brokered indirectly to safeguard prestige. He deconstructed his artistic holdings incrementally, aiming to generate sufficient cash to safeguard essentials. The residents endured unscathed for now, but the uncertainty persisted. For how much longer? Into 1870 and 1871, the strain mounted. Borrowing costs soared. Lenders turned impatient. The economy's rebound after the crash crawled ahead, too sluggishly for those burdened by boom-era debts. The numbers were unforgiving and deteriorating. Within the home, daily existence persisted, but with fading opulence. Staff numbers dwindled. Visitors grew scarce. Spaces meant for lively occupation fell silent. Illumination from gas jets continued. Heating systems hummed on. The apparatus operated, albeit subdued. The gallery-like quality endured, but the admirers faded. This wasn't an abrupt downfall. It unfolded as gradual suffocation, a fiscal demise spanning years, affording space for strategies, optimism, and near escapes that faltered at the last. Lockwood had crafted for eternity, only to learn that endurance demands ongoing support. When the momentum falters, all else decelerates. By 1872, 3 years post-Black Friday, conditions reached a breaking point. The estate still awed and operated smoothly. Its master had exhausted his options. Holdings had shrunk. Liabilities had ballooned. No economic upswing provided relief. Then, amid this drawn-out disaster, a swifter blow landed, something that rendered financial woes seem minor by comparison. Legrand Lockwood, at age 49, exhausted his lifespan completely. He passed away. His end came abruptly, unannounced, unprepared for. Legrand Lockwood died in 1872, 7 years after construction began, 4 after occupancy, 3 after his wealth started dissolving. He was 49. The edifice meant to endure generations had, under his watch, scarcely outlasted one U.S. presidency. Tributes in print remained courteous and measured. He had been significant prior to Black Friday. Before the crash unmasked how much Gilded Age prosperity rested on borrowed strength, rather than solid ground. Accounts noted his finance career, rail investments, Norwalk residence. They skirted shortfalls. Elites like him received decorous farewells, balance sheets notwithstanding. Mourning drapes adorned the entrances, a venue built for showcasing, hospitality, and triumph, now hosted loss. Grievers traversed the rotunda, where the Bierstadt commanded attention, amid Herter Brothers' furniture arrays, still flawlessly arrayed under functioning gas sconces and amid lingering radiator warmth. All systems worked, save the prospects ahead. Rebecca Lockwood, his widow who shared the Legrand name, took ownership of the architectural masterpiece alongside its mounting financial ruin, all at once. The property arrived burdened with obligations that mounted quicker than the leftover holdings could offset. While the art collection retained its worth, it lacked ready cash. The structure itself was invaluable, yet impossible to offload. She started by taking stock, piece by piece, across each chamber. She recorded what had endured despite the discreet disposals from earlier times. The Bierstadt painting stayed put, far too immense, too renowned, and too integral to the estate to relocate. The bulk of the principal pieces of furniture persisted. The engineering features continued operating as intended, though the economic framework that once upheld everything had vanished. Recurring expenses proved overwhelming: fuel for warmth, salaries for a pared-down but essential household, maintenance for an edifice whose vastness required ongoing vigilance, levies on 50 acres and 44,000 square feet, coverage for chambers brimming with treasures, fuel for illumination, provisions for anyone remaining beneath the eaves. The estate devoured supplies much like a relentless engine. It showed no concern for their availability. Rebecca Lockwood confronted a problem with no answer. Maintaining the place outstripped what earnings could provide. Disposing of sufficient items to fund its upkeep would strip away the very treasures that made preservation worthwhile. The logic looped endlessly and constricted further. She traversed spaces her spouse had enjoyed free from monetary dread. The study, its shelves fortified with volumes, the sitting rooms where setups exceeded the worth of typical homes, the central hall where the Bierstadt's untamed landscape seemed worlds away from these pressing, suffocating woes. Quiet, enveloped Elm Park. No gatherings, no planned soirees where the residence shone as a platform for aspirations. Chambers, crafted for gatherings, now resounded only with a widow's steps and a diminished retinue. The edifice turned into a tomb for its own aspirations. Designed to proclaim endurance, it instead highlighted impermanence. Intended to showcase refined tastes, it revealed economic vulnerability. Meant to last ages, it had devoured its creator in under 10 years. In 1874, 2 years following Lockwood's passing, the unavoidable loomed at the door. Liabilities couldn't be whittled down indefinitely. Lenders wouldn't remain placated eternally. Outlays couldn't shrink sufficiently without forsaking the site entirely. The calculations had run their course. The grand residence, crafted to enshrine Legrand Lockwood, now threatened to sever his lineage's hold completely. The alert came wrapped in precise juridical terms, its intent starkly evident. December 1874. The declaration reached her via official documents. Legalese, crafted to render disaster as routine. Under the wording, the truth rang clear. The Lockwood clan's rights to the estate had expired. Seizure wasn't abrupt. It capped seasons of haggling, deferrals, and ever more frantic monetary tactics. Rebecca Lockwood had exhausted every option to postpone this moment. Offloading holdings, trimming budgets, negotiating with lenders who started understanding and grew exasperated. The numbers prevailed. Indebtedness had swelled beyond feasible reimbursement. Running the grand house depleted more than surviving resources could yield. Lenders had granted all due leniency to a respected bereaved woman, yet indulgence can't indefinitely evade the ledger. The bailiff arrived on a chilly dawn. No drama, no malice, just papers needing endorsement, confirmations that ownership was changing hands, that control would transfer, that the kin's occupancy had hit its lawful limit. Rebecca Lockwood affixed her mark. What alternative was there? Resistance would merely amplify the ordeal, prolong it, heighten the shame. Endorsing allowed a shred of poise to linger, permitting the unavoidable to unfold discreetly. She endorsed. The estate remained unaltered amid its 50 acres. Identical stone barriers, identical sloped roofline, identical 62 chambers equipped with gas fixtures, heating units, and communication pipes. The Bierstadt still commanded the central hall. Herder Brothers pieces still graced the sitting areas. The technical setup still performed precisely. Yet control, the intangible that outweighed mere masonry, had transferred. A concise announcement surfaced in the Community Gazette. The Lockwood estate at Elm Park faced auction to settle debts. Prospective buyers might schedule inspections via the designated representative. Conditions obtainable upon request. A modest blurb tucked amid classified notices, simple to overlook unless sought. The sum due was listed in precise amounts. Sums that traced the descent from 1868's pinnacle, that exposed the true toll of erecting for eternity absent sustaining revenue, that depicted how swiftly a Gilded Age wealth could invert. Rebecca toured the interior for the final occasion, briskly, without nostalgia. Prolonging offered no benefit, yet she passed through areas fashioned to symbolize her husband's lasting triumph. Zones that had swallowed his funds and perhaps quickened his demise. The spaces stood devoid of occupants yet laden with possessions. The decor would stay, integrated into the asset, conveyed alongside the title. The conservatory statue would remain positioned in its circular enclosure. Volumes of books would hold their orderly formation. Subsequent proprietors would receive more than mere structures and infrastructure. They would take possession of the full scenic composition that LeGrand Lockwood had so meticulously curated. All but the foundational vision itself, originally constructed as a testament to one individual's lofty aspirations, a bold declaration of triumph in the Gilded Age's competitive landscape. The residents now faced repurposing, bearing fresh interpretations and embodying another person's notion of prosperity. Softened footfalls echoed along passageways crafted for more resonant echoes. The handful of lingering staff labored in silence, their futures uncertain, aware that the incoming regime would determine the operators of the estate and their methods. Come January 1875, the handover concluded. The Lockwood designation vanished from official documents. Fresh proprietors were duly recorded. The estate at Elm Park endured unaltered, unconcerned by the abstract entitlements imposed by people. Then, an unexpected turn unfolded. The newcomers refrained from raising it. They avoided parceling it out. They skipped salvaging the furnishings for profit. Instead, they settled in and preserved it all precisely as found. The Mathews clan took up residence in 1876. Charles D. Mathews, a prosperous financier, had the means to secure an asset that had slipped from Lockwood's grasp. The acquisition itself held no shock. Elites of his stature frequently snapped up beleaguered properties. What astonished was the aftermath of the transaction. He altered virtually nothing. The conservatory statue stayed in the rotunda. The Herder brothers' chambers maintained their precise layouts. The library preserved its shelves of volumes. Gas fixtures illuminated the identical chambers. Heating pipes warmed the very areas where most purchasers might have erased a predecessor's preferences to assert their own. Mathews grasped the true nature of his acquisition. Not just an empty framework, but a unified artistic statement. Extracting elements would diminish its impact. The residence's harmony stemmed from every component being deliberately selected to complement the others. This approach anticipated the preservation ethos long before it gained popularity. The Gilded Age prized reinvention. Incoming residents commonly eviscerated interiors to pursue emerging trends. Yet Mathews held firm. By the late 1870s, the Second Empire style that Leonau had sketched was already waning in appeal. Queen Anne influences and the aesthetic movement were gaining ground. Still, Mathews upheld Lockwood's original concept unmarred. Archival upkeep logs reveal the details. Bills for pigments blended to echo the initial hues. Stucco fixes that revived contours instead of substituting them. Reupholstering with materials chosen to align with the debut arrangement. Gas hardware maintained, and in instances demanding caution, subtly modernized rather than replaced with fashionable alternatives. Such commitment demanded both capital and discipline. Capital, since upholding a 44,000-square-foot domain calls for ongoing expenditures. Discipline, as updating to contemporary standards would prove simpler, less expensive, and more in vogue. Mathews likely sensed intuitively that the property's worth resided in capturing a distinct era, an idea fossilized in built form. Daily existence within the walls proceeded close to Lockwood's blueprint. Receptions in the grand salons, domestic routines in secluded wings, utilities humming unobtrusively. The key distinction lay in steadiness. Mathews commanded the funds to sustain Lockwood's creation, absent the fiscal strains that had undone its founder. Images from the Mathews era capture remarkable sameness. Upholstered pieces occupy their prior spots from older shots. Artworks adorn the same panels. Even decorative items on mantels and tabletops seem untouched. This wasn't an exhibit space. It was a home actively used. Nevertheless, it achieved curatorial precision in replicating the starting blueprint. The household introduced minor enhancements, subtle modifications, technical enhancements with advancing innovations, unassuming alterations to service zones, pragmatic shifts that spared the splendor of the visible areas. They coexisted with Lockwood's lingering influence without yielding to its every whim. Yearly expenses stayed burdensome. Shipments of coal to power the furnace. Wages for the household team. Reduced in number from Lockwood's days, but still considerable. Standard care where _0_ encompassed nurturing 62 chambers. Levies on grounds that Norwalk now viewed as valuable real estate. But the Mathews wealth endured. No desperate divestitures. No demands from lenders. No compelled auctions. The lineage held what Lockwood never did. Reliable revenue matched to the structure's demands. At last, the estate could fulfill its core aim, not only to impress upon unveiling, but to persist through successive eras. As the century shifted, the dwelling had surpassed its architect by almost 30 years. The Mathews had dwelled there longer than Lockwood managed. It was gradually evolving into the Lockwood-Mathews mansion. A blended legacy, honoring both originator and steward. Second Empire had become thoroughly passé. The Gilded Age receded into memory. Emerging wealth erected novel architectural forms. Yet atop its Norwalk rise, the mansion stood firm, Upkept, occupied, operating true to its vision from 40 years prior. The challenge had shifted. It wasn't about outlasting the original proprietor anymore. Now it was about enduring the entire 20th century. That era dawned with challenges no design drawing could fix. A home that had stunned in 1868 felt downright outdated by then. Its plumbing and wiring held up, its chambers still wowed, but the costs of running 44,000 square feet were changing in directions the Mathews family couldn't steer. Real estate taxes kept climbing, steady and unforgiving. Expenses that felt routine in the 1870s weighed heavy by the 1910s. As Norwalk spread out, property worth skyrocketed, and tax evaluations saw grandeur as a sign of deep pockets. The yearly levy on 50 acres and 62 rooms ate up more and more of their budget with each passing year. Wages for workers followed the exact same upward path. The whole network of household help that fueled Gilded Age estates was falling apart. Servants gained options these days: assembly lines, desk jobs, positions that let them sleep in their own beds. The ones who stuck around pushed for bigger paychecks, better treatment, and fewer hours on the clock. Keeping the place operational called for a big crew just to handle the basics: scrubbing 62 rooms, firing up the furnace, tending the lawns, whipping up feasts in a kitchen meant for lavish parties. None of it was indulgence, it was just the nuts and bolts of daily life. But those nuts and bolts were outstripping what they brought in. So the Mathews started sealing off parts of the house. Nothing dramatic or forever, just winter by winter. Zones turned frigid, steam pipes silenced, linens thrown over everything. Doors locked on spaces that might see use again come springtime, or perhaps never. It boiled down to financial rationing. Getting the full building through a Connecticut cold spell, burned through heaps of coal. Every load drained funds they had less and less of. Shutting down areas cut the burn, sure, but it shrank their world to a sliver of what LeGrand Lockwood had dreamed up. Come the 1920s, cars redrew the boundaries. Those 50 acres weren't countryside anymore. They edged into suburbia. The Boston Post Road hummed with autos instead of coaches. Open fields that struck Lockwood as serene now screamed potential for building. Folks nearby cashed in, big holdings carved up, chunks feeding into new neighborhoods. The estate's land stood as the biggest untouched stretch in a closing web of streets. Calls to unload it grew louder. Builders came calling. Carving it into lots looked more lucrative on the books than holding one grand pile. The clan could pocket the cash and head to a saner spot. That was the smart play, the one so many others took. Yet the Mathews hung tight, driven partly by emotion. Sure, feelings counted, but mostly because letting go smacked of giving up. The place had weathered Lockwood's ruin, title shifts and waves of style changes. Dumping it on builders would undo all that grit in hours. The payroll thinned out, bit by bit. Jobs axed, tasks bundled, corners ignored. Into the 1930s, a setup that once supported crowds of staff shrank to barely a few. The Depression sped up the rot. Steady cash flows dried up. Bills that once fit the budget no longer did. Extra wings went dark. More pipes went quiet. More chairs vanished under sheets. The setup, Detlef Lenau, built as one seamless operation, now chugged along in bits and pieces. The building turned on itself, gnawing from the outside in. Repairs got picky. Fix only what breaking would wreck. The roof, since leaks spell doom. The heater, because freezing winters don't wait. The rest faded. Colors on walls muted, wall coverings curled. Leaf gold lost its gleam. Top-shelf decor began betraying signs of abandonment. By the 1950s, things hit a fever pitch. They still held the deed, but owning it felt like a curse. The structure begged for cash infusions they couldn't muster. The plot lured suitors they kept turning away. It came down to a stark split. Rescue the home or rescue their wallet. Then Norwalk's city planners rolled in with sketches and pitches, answers that would wipe out the clan's headache by wiping out the cause. They craved the site. They pictured a makeover, and step one was making the mansion vanish. The 1960s ushered in a fresh danger. Not money woes, which they'd juggled for years, not creeping wear, which they dodged with smart cutbacks and delay tactics. This hit hard and fast, fueled by local government's grab powers. Norwalk's development team dreamed big for Elm Park. The house claimed top-tier dirt, in a spot getting pricier by the minute. 50 acres primed for workspaces, garages, town halls, or whatever beat a crumbling family pad. Officials wielded weapons the Mathews didn't, the muscle to claim land for the greater good. Their opening bid landed in 1964, wrapped in polite talk of public priorities and peak potential. Charts swapping the house's outline for build plans, vows of fatter tax rolls. It all spun as unstoppable growth, the expected path for a booming town. But the real point hung unspoken. The mansion was yesterday's news. It hogged ground while giving back scraps to the community. It leaned on city resources, roads, utilities, and fire services, all while generating ever-dwindling tax income as its upkeep declined. From a zoning perspective, the property appeared wasteful. Soon, the discussions kicked off. City council gatherings where officials revealed their proposals, followed by open forums where locals voiced their views. The Mathews clan showed up, grasping that they weren't just up against one proposed design, but a broader mindset. Historic homes were seen as issues to fix, rather than treasures to safeguard. In the concept sketches, the mansion just disappeared, neither modified nor reused, but wiped clean. The illustrations depicted sleek contemporary structures on a cleared plot, as though the prior era's constructions had never existed. This was the classic rationale for urban redevelopment: raze the old to make room for the new. Resistance built gradually, then gained momentum. Heritage groups started paying attention. Professors of architecture submitted letters, and the stakes extended far beyond one property. Could a Gilded Age estate endure if a municipality set its sights on the site? If Norwalk demolished the Lockwood-Mathews house, comparable structures nationwide might face the same fate. Debates overflowed meeting halls and opinion columns. Supporters of conservation highlighted its value. The Second Empire design, Detlef Lenau's creation, the Bierstadt that still dominated the rotunda. Once demolished, you can't reconstruct a time period, they argued. Detractors fired back with financial concerns, skyrocketing upkeep costs, obvious decay, and underutilized terrain. They shared images: flaking exterior, damaged interiors, sealed-off areas, and insisted the advocates were protecting a wreck, not a viable home. Each perspective held some truth. The estate carried immense historical weight and was plainly in disrepair. It represented unique design elements and occupied desirable public space. The contention wasn't over the presence of realities, but over which ones would prevail. By 1966, tensions reached a climax. Builders offered substantial bids. Officials refined their schemes. The Mathews relatives confronted a tough decision. Either devise a strategy to rescue the structure, or witness its loss to eminent domain they couldn't overcome. Traditional paths had run dry. A personal overhaul was beyond their means. Marketing it as a private dwelling failed. No single buyer sought such an enormous commitment. Handing it over untouched wasn't feasible. Who would take on the load? Then a bold suggestion emerged. Not a corporate solution, not government control, but an unprecedented approach for Norwalk. Almost naively optimistic considering the building's plight. Suppose the mansion transformed into a museum, not transferred to one, not run by local authorities. What if it established itself as its own entity, a charitable group dedicated exclusively to safeguarding the very edifice it occupied? An odd, self-referential concept, a body formed to sustain its own shell, yet maybe the sole viable notion, turning the unattainable into an official structure on documents. In 1966, the Lockwood-Mathews Mansion Museum came into being as a nonprofit entity, not through a transfer or city acquisition, but via a fresh legal framework built for one goal: safeguard the residents, a graceful loop. The mansion would secure its own future by evolving into an entity deserving protection. The process proved intricate. The Mathews kin would contribute the land. The fresh organization would take ownership, along with all accompanying duties. A board of directors would assemble. Efforts to raise funds would launch for pressing repairs. The site would welcome visitors, creating modest income and bolstering the case for upkeep. On document, it addressed every challenge. Reality delivered scant progress. The structure still required vast sums, hundreds of thousands, for critical fixes. The group lacked reserves, daily funds, or personnel. They held a stunning yet crumbling treasure and the authority to defend it. But defense demanded resources they couldn't muster. The inaugural year focused on mere endurance, not triumph. Volunteers cleared out years of accumulated junk. They tackled only the gravest dangers. No lavish revamps, merely measures to avert collapse. The roof received hasty fixes. Shattered panes got boarded up. Spaces were shored up to ensure guest safety. Visitor tours commenced in 1967. Brief, restricted sessions led by unpaid guides who absorbed the history while sharing it. Admission fees stayed low. The goal was visibility over earnings. The property had to demonstrate its potential as a community asset. That visitors truly desired to explore it. They arrived gradually initially. Nearby residents intrigued by the longtime icon they'd overlooked. Design scholars examining Second Empire features. Conservationists inspired by a blueprint that could aid other endangered sites. Attendance figures were humble compared to typical museums. Yet they conveyed the vital point. Connection. The mansion drew interest. Efforts to secure donations accelerated. Outreach to regional companies, requests for foundation support. Drives in the community for historic legacy. The amounts fell short of the massive requirements. Though the funds collected fell far short of the hundreds of thousands required, they proved the initiative's potential. The pivotal moment came in 1971 when the Lockwood-Mathews Mansion earned designation as a National Historic Landmark. This went beyond the standard National Register entry. It marked the site as one of America's premier historic assets. The accolade brought no financial support, yet it delivered an invaluable alternative. Official endorsement from the federal government. What had started as a community effort now carried nationwide architectural weight. A bronze plaque affixed to the exterior sealed the status. The structure's significance extended past Norwalk, past Connecticut, and past niche preservation groups. LeGrand Lockwood's personal legacy had transformed into a shared national gem. This shift altered the funding landscape. Previously rejected grant proposals gained fresh scrutiny. Organizations supporting sites of national importance now had reason to consider Norwalk. The mansion's decay evolved from a local concern into a broader conservation challenge. Attendance climbed as a result. The landmark recognition sparked articles in area newspapers. Trade publications on architecture highlighted the residence as an emerging triumph in safeguarding history. Optimistic amid its ongoing disrepair, but the storyline held sway. The inaugural major drive for funds kicked off, aimed not at total revival, which remained a distant dream, but at essential safeguards. These included a long-term roof overhaul spanning years rather than weeks, window fixes to prevent moisture damage, and heating improvements to enable year-round access. Such efforts curbed further damage and extended the timeline. Into the mid-1970s, the approach showed promise. Tenuous, expensive, partial, and vulnerable, yet effective. The edifice endured. Guided visits continued. The operating group held steady. A once private burden had shifted into a communal resource. Still, mere endurance fell short of true longevity. Expenses outpaced what ticket sales and modest donations could cover. Unaddressed repairs piled up. Full-scale renewal stayed elusive. The institution required a fresh income source, capable of yielding substantial returns without heavy initial investment. It possessed the ideal draw already. Stunning period interiors suited for on-screen capture. As events unfolded, the entertainment industry stepped in to deliver precisely the lifeline the mansion craved for its ongoing existence. Film teams began showing up in the late 1970s. Sight spotters discovered what advocates for heritage had long recognized. The Lockwood-Mathews mansion served as a portal to the past. The spaces maintained by the Mathews family, shored up by dedicated helpers and protected by the museum, offered flawless, historical authenticity. Far from replicas or fabricated props, these were genuine, Gilded Age chambers. The debut shoot brought a reasonable payout for just one day of work, with strict agreements detailing permissible interactions and nervous curators overseeing every arrangement. The resulting payment, modest in industry terms, proved generous for a charitable operation. A single session's rate could restore an entire chamber's decorative plastering. Additional gigs soon materialized. TV productions seeking Victorian atmospheres, movies evoking the opulent era, ads craving genuine structural elegance. Every booking funneled earnings directly into upkeep that would otherwise go unfunded. The financial impact was remarkable. A 2-day rental might fetch $10,000. That amount could support extended restoration efforts by skilled artisans. The property generated revenue through its mere presence, staying true to its original character. Over the years, its screen appearances multiplied. The Stepford Wives in 1975 featured its uncannily pristine spaces. Ragtime in 1981 captured the exact historical essence required. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, broadcast projects kept coming back. Each one bolstered the mansion's entertainment credentials. By the early 2000s, it had become a reliable go-to for scouts. Set creators knew the layouts and their potential, assigning shots to particular areas. The rotunda, still guarded by the Bierstadt, emerged as a go-to location. The majestic staircase starred in various films. The sitting rooms provided options for period-appropriate aesthetics. Earnings stabilized, allowing for forward planning. Operating plans incorporated steady site rental income. Fundraising pushes factored in movie-related support for targeted fixes. The mansion had discovered a modern role that sustained its 19th-century legacy. Contemporary productions upheld the trend. Joker filmed inside its rooms. More came after. Every visit supplied cash, exposure, and evidence of the site's enduring relevance. The twist was sharp and fitting. LeGrand Lockwood had erected the mansion to secure his lasting fame via design. He fell short, passing away soon after, and seeing the property slip away almost at once. Yet the structure attained a different form of timelessness, gracing global screens and becoming known to countless viewers who would never visit Norwalk. The Bierstadt and the Rotunda, symbols of refined taste in their day, now casually appeared in shot backgrounds, reaching crowds beyond Lockwood's wildest dreams. Rental payments covered maintenance postponed for generations. Restorers reapplied gold leaf to the crown moldings, preserved the historic wall coverings, mended the plasterwork, and recreated paints from archival samples, all painstaking and costly efforts, mostly financed by movie producers seeking authentic Gilded Age settings. By 2020, the Lockwood-Mathews mansion had featured in scores of films and shows. Still, exposure and rental income from shoots couldn't address every issue. The most pressing danger lurked out of sight. After a century and a half, the essential utilities keeping the place functional were breaking down. Plumbing, heating, and wiring all needed urgent overhauls. Such extensive repairs would demand a complete shutdown. In 2023, the closure decision stemmed not from collapse, but from bold vision. The museum kept going in limited form. Guided tours continued. Film teams still paid for access. However, the infrastructure Detlef Leonau had engineered back in 1864 was now beyond salvage. The conduits that once delivered water and gas for 150 years no longer could. The options were clear-cut. Pause operations for a thorough modernization, or risk the structure becoming unlivable. They opted to close. A fundraising drive kicked off with a daunting goal: $18 million. This wasn't for flashy decorations or guest amenities, but for the hidden backbone that would determine if the mansion could endure into the next century. HVAC systems to replace the antique heating setup. Sprinklers woven through all 62 chambers. Updated wiring sturdy for a modern exhibit space, yet concealed within the era's aesthetics. Environmental regulation to protect the Bierstadt and delicate furnishings. Upgrades for accessibility that complied with today's rules without damaging the heritage elements. These were the utilities LeGrand Lockwood might have built if contemporary tech had been available. The technical hurdles were immense. Snaking ventilation through a completed historic site without losing ornamental features. Installing fresh power lines, sans exposed wiring, embedding safety measures that shielded the property unobtrusively. Every component called for bespoke solutions. Progress spanned 2024 and stretched into 2025. Public access halted. Builders occupied the interiors. Interior walls were carefully cut open to access hidden frameworks. Subfloors were raised to install piping. Overhead elements were tweaked to hide mechanisms. All actions were recorded meticulously. Changes were planned to be undoable when feasible. Conservation remained paramount. Monitoring devices for heat and moisture were placed throughout. Beyond mere livability, they served preservation needs. The house had lasted 150 years without such precision. The coming 150 years insisted on it. Even the Bierstadt required strict conditions to avoid deterioration. The budget pieced together gradually. Support from endowments, private donors, business backers, and ongoing site rentals during the build. $18 million gathered, much like the mansion itself had been. Via persistent dedication, across time, sustainability wove into the conservation ethos. Fresh setups aimed to lower energy bills while boosting reliability. Light fixtures using LEDs that mimic gaslight glow at a fraction of the cost. Added insulation that honored the original materials. At last, running at peak could prove cost-effective. Inclusivity evolved from afterthought to core design. A lift installed for utility, not disrupting the design. Sloped paths blended into grounds alterations. Facilities updated to modern specs. The estate could now invite all, beyond just the able-bodied navigating steps and tight corridors. The grand reopening was scheduled for June 4, 2025. Far beyond resuming visits, it marked the debut of a state-of-the-art 21st century institution, housed in 19th century grandeur. The tech would vanish from view. The immersion would flow effortlessly. Guests would admire Gilded Age opulence, oblivious to the advanced supports enabling it. Initial walkthroughs would traverse chambers Legrand Lockwood envisioned under the Bierstadt he ordered, through areas the Mathews kin maintained, into a structure community members saved, Hollywood bolstered, and $18 million had just secured for generations ahead. The home that outlasted its occupants had now outlasted them all, and the subtle contentment of those early returnees would affirm a vital truth. True endurance often demands more than a single wealth, more than one lineage, more than a lone era's resolve. At times, it requires a collective choice that some legacies warrant the effort,